The world is always changing. People want to know what's next. Here is what will happen over the next decade. I'm Pastor John Warren. Welcome to Church of the Future.
Think about the future.
Well, hi there. Welcome to my podcast, my YouTube channel, and I'm John Warren. I'm delighted to be able to start this podcast, this YouTube channel with you. It's been quite some months that I've been getting ready. I'm going to be sharing about what I see the future of the Christian church, the way it will unfold over the next decade. And I make some reasonably large claims in that intro. And I don't apologise for that. I feel that God's given me some wisdom. God's given me some insight, and I feel that I'm meant to share it. Probably be easier not to, but I feel like I am meant to. So I shall. Just so you can place what particular corner, what perspective I come from, what corner of the church I'm located in. So yes, I'm a Christian. I'm a pastor of a church. I'm a Protestant. I'm an evangelical. I'm a Pentecostal. Do not be fooled by my Australian accent. I am not in Australia. I'm in Britain. I pastor a church that I planted with my wife 12 years ago, and we pastor in a town in the north of England. And that's me. That's the perspective that I will be coming from as I share. So I was planning to start this podcast. I'll call it a podcast, even though it's YouTube. I was planning to start around January. I've ended up starting in May for a whole bunch of reasons. But I think it's been God's grace to me that it's evolved that way, because it's been quite good, a quite encouraging 2025 for a lot of people within the Christian church. There has been a whole bunch of research that's been published in the first few months of this year to indicate that the Christian church is actually doing reasonably well at the moment. And so in the USA, George Barna and Ryan Burge have both been publishing some really encouraging data. Here in Britain, the Bible Society commissioned some research and published just a few weeks ago, and they called their report The Quiet Revival. The idea being that there has been, revival's a strong word, but the idea being that there has been consistent growth in British churches, particularly amongst young men, who were probably the demographic that we're doing worst with. Old ladies, there's no lack. But young men, there certainly was a lack, and yet this data is showing a whole new, at the very least, an openness to the gospel, an openness to the Christian message that was very much not present when they last ran the same survey questions about 7 years ago before the pandemic. A quiet revival, it feels almost too good to hope for, having lived through fairly consistent decline. Now, obviously, there's some parts of the church do better than others and everything, but overall, the church has not had a good, well, really, here in Britain, they had a good 100 years. Christian attendance peaked between World War I and World War II in this nation, and it's been going backwards ever since. And I think in most of the rest of the Anglosphere, when I talk about we, I'm talking about the church in the Britain and its former colonies, the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Together we'll call those five nations the Anglosphere. So when I say we, I'm talking about that's the corner of the Christian church where I'm born and raised. That's where I've been called to minister. That's what I know and love. And so that's when I say we, I'm talking about the church in the Anglosphere. And so is that will the next decade be a positive one, an encouraging one for the Christian church? Well, it just might. I think it just might. This is what I have noticed. I think we are possibly at an Acts 9:31 moment. Acts 9 is the chapter that describes the conversion of Paul, or Saul, as he then was. And at the start of Acts chapter 9, what you've got is Saul running around from house to house, hauling Christians out and having them put into prison or even put to death. He is a ferocious persecutor of Christians, and the church lived in fear of him and the others who worked with him. So it was a time of strong persecution. Saul has his encounter with Christ on the road to Damascus, and then immediately does a complete 180-degree turn, and now he starts preaching the Christian message, and which had everyone, both friend and foe, scratching their head thinking we didn't see that coming. And so that's described throughout Acts chapter 9, and then towards the end of the chapter, verse 31 says this: "Then the church enjoyed a time of peace and was strengthened. Living in the fear of the Lord and encouraged by the Holy Spirit, it increased in number." And so it moved out of that season of strong persecution into a season where the waters were calmer, and because they were calmer, the church did well. Friends, I think we are possibly at an Acts 9:31 moment where there has been a lot of opposition to the Christian church and the Christian message, and that seems to have eased off substantially. I'll give you some examples of what I'm talking about here. Right? For example, go back 20 years, and the new atheist movement was riding high, and that was a movement led by the biologist at Oxford University, Richard Dawkins, and he wrote his book, The God Delusion. And atheism was not only was it popular, but it was vicious. Right? It wasn't just we are for the atheist position. It was we are very much against the Christian faith entirely. And in that book, he describes Christians teaching their children the Bible, which is what happens in every Sunday school or kids ministry up and down the entirety of the Christian church. He said Christians teaching the Bible to their children is child abuse. That was his claim. Right? That's how strongly anti-Christian that movement was. That was 20 years ago, but just more recently, that movement seems to have sort of run out of juice. Just doesn't have the energy that it used to. And even Dawkins himself recently described himself as a cultural Christian, meaning he likes Western society. He likes it more than what he sees in Islamic societies and what he sees in communist societies. And he's realized that the Christian church has left a cultural legacy in his nation, which he really likes. And so he's not about to get baptized or commit his life to Christ or anything like that. But and really, it's a nonsensical thing. There's no such thing as a cultural Christian. You're either committed to Christ or you're not. And so he still remains very much an atheist, but he is no longer persecuting the church in the way that he was. And he might dispute whether he was actually persecuting the church, but he absolutely was persecuting the church. And now, and I'm not just talking about Dawkins, but that whole movement has run out of puff, and the persecution that the church is getting from that corner has died down substantially. Not to zero, but has died down substantially. Second thing, there's been a decrease in anti-Christian rhetoric. Right? Example, so it used to be popular in many circles to have a go at the church because the church was powerful, and if you wanted to stick your finger in the eye of people in power, then having a go at the Christian church was an easy way to do it. And people have been doing that for a long, long time. But you had things like, 20 odd years ago, the most popular novel, one of the most popular novels ever written, was The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. And the whole idea of the novel is that Jesus didn't die or be raised to life. In fact, he went on and married Mary Magdalene, had lots of children, and that was the main plot line of the book, and our hero uncovers that this is the case. And that is obviously a direct attack on the central event of the Christian faith. Right? That is, I would describe the Da Vinci Code as a clearly anti-Christian book. And it was immensely popular. Immensely popular. There hasn't been a novel anything like it for a long, long time. That was the sort of anti-Christian rhetoric that, all Christians were just having to deal with a couple of decades ago. But now, if you want to stick your finger in the eye of the powerful, you don't go after, say, the bishops of the Christian church. You go after tech billionaires. They run a handful of companies that our lives that are so central to the way we live our lives today. And the Christian church is like so far down the list of powerful institutions. It's nothing. It has nothing like the cultural clout that it used to, and because of that, it's getting overlooked. It's getting left alone. And that's actually a good thing for Christians, because that hostility just made life and ministry that much harder for Christians trying to spread the gospel. So that's the new atheist movement, anti-Christian rhetoric in general. And I'll give you a third thing that's changed, which is the sexual revolution has sort of gone into a dead end. And so by the sexual revolution, I mean the collection of ideas and values and behaviours that were expressly rejecting the Christian view of sexuality. And the sexual revolution, if we want to, you can date it to 1968, the Summer of Love, if you wish. And from that point onwards, the world has been very hostile to Christian values and Christian behaviours around sex. You're probably aware of this, right? And ideas about homosexuality and just promiscuity in general have been sort of the tip of the spear. And so there's been a tremendous, and so anyone who advocates for traditional Christian values and behaviours, anyone who does that in polite society has been jumped on and just set to with some force over recent decades, and that's been going on for the whole time that I've been alive, with increasing and ferocity as time has gone on. But what's happened in the last few years is that as the sexual revolution has had victory after victory, and it's won a lot of victories, no doubt about that, it's like, well, where's the next victory? Where's the next victory? And it's ended up putting a lot of effort and energy into the transgender movement, or the idea that people can change their sex and everything. And in so doing, now obviously as a Christian, That's not the view that I take and everything. But what's happened in recent times is that the feminists have been critiquing the transgender movement, and there's been, where there once was this unity of direction behind the sexual revolution, there's now a civil war, if you will, between different non-Christian views of how sexuality should, what sexual behaviours are okay and what are not. And so the whole energy has come out of the sexual revolution because it's gone into this place of transgenderism, but now there's a realization that, well, you can't really change your sex, can you? You can't just by deciding one day that, oh, now I'm female. It just every cell of your body tells you what sex you are, but it's that non-Christians have realised this and are pushing back against it with some force. And so here in Britain, J.K. Rowling, the author, sort of leading the feminist charge against those who have adopted the view of transgenderism that looked like 3 years ago that it was sort of sweeping all before it. And so the sexual revolution has sort of gone into a dead end, and the enemy is no longer the Christian view. In fact, we're not sure who the enemy is because we're not sure which way is up because we've stopped moving and we're trying to work out where we're going. That's what's happened to the sexual revolution. And so you put these three things together, atheist movement has slowed down, the sexual revolution has gone into a dead end, and anti-Christian rhetoric has toned down. And what you find is we could be in Acts 9:31. We've now got, the Christian church now has calmer waters in which to spread its message and do what it's always been doing, has been doing for centuries, simply preaching the gospel, loving one another, gathering together, opening the Bible, sharing the sacraments. Christians are doing what we've always been doing, but all of a sudden it's more attractive to the world than what it was a few years ago. This is a good thing. This is a very good thing. And so the Bible Society are describing this as a quiet revival. And certainly in our church, it all checks out. We've had an openness to the gospel amongst men that we've never had before. In the 11, 12 years that we've been running, we are now more male than what we ever have been before. And, our numbers have done well in the last year or so. And so it all checks out. As a lot of the anecdotes that people have responded to all this data with have said, we're seeing a lot of that. And obviously not every church is going to experience it the same, but it's checking out for a lot of people, and it checks out in our context. So there it is, an Acts 9:31 moment. And so going forward from here, as long as the waters stay calm, and I think the waters staying calm depends upon really what happens at high level of spiritual warfare, which I can't see and nor can you. But for as long as the waters stay calm, the Christian church will do well. And so I see a good decade ahead for the Christian church. And persecution only ever sleeps lightly. And obviously there's still some persecution going on. But in terms of just those large-scale anti-Christian, those things that are society-wide that have made it very hard for the church, those things have really come off the boil. They've slowed down, and we could be in Acts 9:31 moment. However, if we're going to have a revival, I would describe what we're in for as a revival of churn. By churn, what I mean is lots and lots of movement. People be coming into the church. Some will stay, but many won't. Many won't. There'll be a huge amount of churn through Christian churches as people have a look, maybe have a second look. Nah. We are in for a revival of churn. Whilst overall numbers will increase, there'll be a huge amount of churn as open people discover that the demands of Christ are large, very large. And so that's where we're headed for a revival of churn. The defining feature of our culture is individualism. We are an exceedingly individualistic culture. If there is an anthem for the Anglosphere over the last century, it's Frank Sinatra's song, "I Did It My Way." That is how we think. That consumer mindset is deeply, deeply ingrained in us. It is the air that we breathe. And so what it means is that when we have an interest in the gospel, when we come into the Christian church, it doesn't occur to us that we are meant to submit to Christ and submit to Christ's appointed leaders within the church. That it just doesn't occur that that's what we should be doing. And so we are deeply, deeply individualistic people. We don't like being told what to do. We won't be told. Now, my church does a lot of missions work in Eastern Europe. We have every year we make multiple trips usually to Moldova, and I've been to a few other nearby nations in Eastern Europe. And it's just amazing how different they are over there on this point. When in Moldova and in Ukraine, the last missions trip I did before the pandemic was to a friend's church in Ukraine, and his church was about the same size as mine, that is smallish, 50 odd, and his church was about the same age as mine. It was about 5 years old at the time, and it was just as I was spent the morning with them, and I preached and everything like that, and I was just like, this church is solid in a way that mine isn't. Because in Ukraine, when you come to Christ and when you get involved in a church, you commit yourself to that church, to that group, and you raise your children in that church, and your children stay in that church, and that's how they do it, because they just are not individualistic in the way that we are. I watched, and so their churches are solid. When our churches are large, there's still a fragility to it, because you just know that if the wrong thing was said, then bang, a heap of people would leave and everything like that. It's just amazing how, as a pastor, you just give people the most mild feedback on, can you please just not do this? It's a small thing, that'd be so helpful. Bang, gone. Never see them again, right? We just don't like being told. And the contrast with other cultures is immense. If you've done any travel, you'll know that that's the case. So I remember one Sunday in Moldova, I was watching the pastor, and I think I just preached at this service, good Pentecostal church there in Moldova, and I watched the pastor have a chat to one of the people in the church, and I was watching from across the room. I don't know what it said, they were talking in Russian anyway, but it was obvious that she was getting a telling off in public and, right in front of the rest of the church as everyone was milling around having tea and coffee after the service. And her response to this, almost 10-minute, looked like a fairly intense dressing down to me. Her response was, "Yes, Pastor. Thank you, Pastor." She went on her way. I was just like, oh, try that in Britain, in Australia, try that, in anywhere in the Anglosphere. It's just like, good luck, as if you'd ever see that person ever again. There's a 90% chance that they're gone, that they're out the door in that sort of scenario. But over there, they're not individualistic in the way that we are. And so it's a revival of churn that I think is coming. It just so happens that after the church that I'm a pastor of is not especially large, and it's your typical, your average British church. But it just so happens that one of the things that we do really well is reach out to new people, and we've had lots of new people over the last 5 years, and I thank God that that's the case, and we've got some champion bringers within our church. But there's been a huge amount of churn, and as we enter this Acts 9:31 moment, the churn will absolutely continue. And I call it the maturity paradox. This is how it goes. You'll never become mature unless you hang around in church. But you won't hang around in church unless you're mature. If you're immature, then something will happen at some point, and you'll be off to the next church, or you'll sack off the church entirely, and you'll say that you still love God and that you're still a Christian and everything like that, but you're certainly done with that church, and maybe with all the others as well. Right? The maturity paradox. You won't become mature unless you hang around, but you won't hang around unless you're mature. And some of you are thinking, hang on, that means maturity is impossible. What I would say is this: maturity is rare. It is exceedingly rare. And people who are mature in their faith, that is, they will receive a criticism or rebuke from their leaders and go with it and accept feedback they're given and everything. Maturity is exceedingly rare, and those who have it by the grace of God, because in our culture it is so hard to get. So that's the maturity paradox. And you think, we should be mature. Yes, but the thing is, when you first start out in the Christian life, you're not mature. You cannot be mature in your first decade, or at least first 5 years walking with Christ. It's why Paul says, don't put new Christians into leadership, because it's not good for them. Right? They're not mature. The maturity paradox: you won't become mature unless you hang around, but you won't hang around unless you're mature. And so what that means is, when you combine our individualistic culture, combine that with an Acts 9:31 moment, what you get is a revival of churn. Lots of people coming, but also lots of people going, because for whatever reason, that Christ is a threat to their individualistic way of thinking, that deeply ingrained way of thinking, and they realise, I'm not prepared to give that up. A revival of churn could well be coming our way over the next decade. So I'll stop there for episode 1. I've got about 100 episodes of this podcast mapped out. I've got a lot to say, I've got a lot to share. I'm looking forward to it. So please give some feedback in the comments here on YouTube if you wish. That would be great. Just want to say thank you to my wife, Catherine, for helping me get set up. Thank you to Jake Womack for your support as well. I really value it. And please give some comments and share it if you wish. If you think that there's some wisdom in there that's worth considering, then stay with me for episode 2. So I'll do an episode every week, so maybe twice a week sometimes. So thanks, folks. Be blessed. Bye for now.
Think about the future.